Chapter 5 The Church Service. At 9 o'clock that morning, the church bell began to ring, which meant that it was time for everyone to gather to hear the minister, Mr. Sprague, speak. The Sunday school children would all join their families to listen to him. And it was always the same, that while he spoke to the village people and led them in prayer, the parents would quietly try to keep their children from behaving badly. Of course, Sid and Mary enjoyed listening to Mr. Sprague, so Aunt Polly never had trouble with them in church. But Tom would always have to be seated far away from the window, so he wouldn't spend the whole time looking outside. The whole village was slowly entering the church and taking their seats. The young, the middle-aged, the old, the rich, and the poor. Everyone was there, including Mrs. Douglas, who lived alone in the big house on Cardiff Hill. She was one of the richest people in the village. Even though she smiled and was generally a very kind person, Tom always thought she looked lonely since her husband died a few years ago. All of the children were wearing their best clothing, and the pretty young girls all looked prettier than usual, which also kept the boys from paying attention to Mr. Sprague. All of the boys except for Willie Mufferson, who was always well behaved. None of the children liked him, but he was a favorite among the adults. Everyone now became quiet at the sound of the bell ringing again. It was time for Mr. Sprague to begin. As usual, they started by singing a little. Then this would be followed by meeting announcements for the week. And finally, they would say many prayers. Prayers for the church, for the people of the village, for the village itself, for America, and for people in countries all over the world. Tom was bored, and it took all of his strength to keep from falling asleep. He decided to concentrate on an insect that landed on the seat in front of him. It started to slowly and carefully clean itself with its legs. Tom couldn't understand this, because he didn't like to clean himself so carefully. He was always in a hurry to play. He wanted to pick the insect up, but knew that his aunt would punish him if he did this during Mr. Sprague's prayer. But as his prayer came closer and closer to ending, Tom's hand moved closer and closer toward the insect. And at the last word, Tom put it between his hands. However, Aunt Polly made him set it free. But church didn't end there. Mr. Sprague began to talk about something else Tom couldn't understand. The minister mostly read from a book, and the only thing Tom could ever remember from the book was how many pages had been read. But this morning was different. Mr. Sprague spoke about his hopes for the world in the future. He hoped for world peace, where all nations, both rich and poor, strong and weak, would join together in friendship. This was interesting to Tom. He imagined the strong countries as wild animals and the weak countries as farm animals. He imagined himself playing with all of these animals together, without any fear. And he found himself agreeing strongly with Mr. Sprague's wishes for the future of the world. But soon the minister began to talk about other things that were very uninteresting to Tom. He tried to listen, but his thoughts would easily wander to some other idea, such as the things he had in his pocket. He remembered that he had a little box with an insect inside. He took it out to play with it, but the first thing the insect did was bite Tom on the finger. Tom dropped it on the floor and it landed on its back. Tom noticed that it couldn't get back on its feet. He wanted to help it, but it was too far away, and his aunt would get angry with him if he didn't pay full attention to the minister. Suddenly, Tom saw a dog come into the church. The dog looked just as bored as Tom. He too wanted something fun to do. He saw the insect on the floor and became excited. He decided to play with it. He walked in a circle around the insect and made little noises at it. Then he tried to smell the insect by putting his nose near it. And just like Tom's finger, the insect bit the dog on the nose. The dog cried out in pain and ran away from the insect. Everyone who had seen what happened laughed at the dog's foolishness. The dog was angry and embarrassed, and he went back to the insect and made angry sounds at it this time. But after a while he became bored again and found a piece of paper on the ground, which he started to play with. He did this for a few minutes and then got tired. He decided to lie down for a while, but having forgotten the insect, he sat down on top of it. A few seconds later, he was running around the church and crying out in pain. His owner quickly put the dog outside and took his seat again, silently begging the minister's pardon. Tom could still hear the dog crying outside as it ran away from the church. Mr. Sprague was upset about being interrupted. He angrily waited for everyone to stop laughing. It took a long time before everyone was quiet again. But soon, Mr. Sprague continued with his prayer. Every once in a while, laughing could be heard, but the minister did his best not to pay attention to it. The people were happy to find that he only had a few more things to say, because they were ready for church to be over, so they could enjoy the rest of their Sunday. Tom left the church feeling very satisfied. He thought he wouldn't mind going there if it would be this interesting every Sunday. The only thing he wasn't happy about was having his insect stolen by that silly dog. Chapter 6. A Conversation About Spirits. Tom hated Mondays. Monday always meant the beginning of a new school week. This made him hate weekends, too, because they were so enjoyable that they made the weekdays even more boring. He thought that if he had to sit through school today, it might kill him. Then he had the idea that he could stay home if he were ill. But he didn't really feel ill. He tried to concentrate on different parts of his body to see if they felt bad, but no matter how hard he thought about it, he seemed to feel perfectly fine. Then he remembered his foot, and this gave him the idea to start crying in pain. He cried loudly, but his brother Sid didn't seem to hear him. He just continued sleeping. Tom cried louder and louder. He cried so much that he actually started to believe that his foot really hurt, but still, Sid didn't seem to notice.
Oh, Sid, help me, Sid,
Tom cried. Sid still didn't move, so Tom picked up a book and threw it at him. Sid sat up, saying,
"Hey, what's wrong?"
Now Tom pretended not to hear him. Sid started to push Tom to get him to answer. Tom said,
"Oh, don't do that, Sid, it hurts. I'll go and get Aunt Polly." "No, Sid, don't do that,"
Tom said as he pretended to cry.
"I want you to know that when I'm dead, I won't be angry with you for all those times you got me into trouble with Aunt Polly. You mean you're dying, Tom? I'm leaving everything valuable I have to that new girl. Be sure that she gets all of it, Sid.
But Sid didn't hear Tom now, for he had run to his aunt, yelling,
Tom's dying! Tom's dying!
Aunt Polly came running into Tom's room, her face looking very frightened. She touched his head and cried to him, Tell me what's wrong, Tom. Tell your aunt where it hurts.
It's my foot, Auntie. I think the doctor will have to cut it off.
Aunt Polly suddenly stopped crying and just stared at Tom for a moment. Then she fell back into a chair and started laughing and crying at the same time. Once she had gotten control of herself again, she said, Tom, you get out of bed and get ready for school. This helped Tom to remember that he wasn't really in pain, and he jumped out of bed and ran to get dressed. On his way to school, Tom saw his friend Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry had a bad family. His father always drank too much, and his parents were always fighting with each other. So Huckleberry had run away from home, and for this reason, many of the adults in the village thought he was a bad child. But the children thought of him differently. They liked him, and they wished that they could be like him and be as free as he was to do anything he wanted, for he didn't go to school or church. Instead, he would just play or go swimming or fishing. Because he didn't live with his parents anymore, Huckleberry's clothing was often in very poor condition. They were always dirty and either too big or too small for him. He was always the first to wear no shoes in the summer and the last to put them on in the winter. And Huckleberry almost never washed himself. Tom liked Huck a lot, and because the adults disliked Huckleberry so much, Tom played with him as often as he could.
Hello there, Huckleberry,
said Tom.
Yeah, hello,
replied Huckleberry.
What do you have there in that bag? It's a dead cat. Wow, Huck, will you let me see him? Where did you get it? A boy gave it to me. What do you plan to do with a dead cat, Huck? I'm going to use it to take off these warts.
Huckleberry showed Tom the ugly spots on his hands.
But how can a dead cat remove warts? After someone dies and their body is put in the ground, you take your cat to that person's grave just before 12 o'clock midnight. After 12 o'clock, you will start to hear a low sound, something like the wind, or you might even hear someone talking very softly. These are terrible spirits that have come to carry the dead man away. You won't be able to see them, but you can hear them. And when they start to leave with the body, you throw the cat at them and say, Spirits follow body. Cat follows spirits. Warts follow cat. I promise you that will take away anyone's warts. Have you ever done it before? Not yet, but you remember that old Hoss Williams just died, right? Yes, I remember, Huck, but they put him in the ground on Saturday. The spirits have already taken his body. Now, think for a minute. If he was buried on Saturday, the spirits couldn't have taken him away at 12 o'clock because it would be Sunday at that time. Bad spirits don't dare do anything on Sunday. That's God's day. So I'm thinking they'll come tonight. You know, you're right. So can I come with you? Are you sure you won't be too frightened? Of course not. Come and get me at my house tonight. Make a sound like a cat, and I'll come out to meet you. Yes, but you answer this time, because the last time I did that, you never answered, and one of your neighbors started throwing rocks at me. I'm sorry, Huck. My aunt was keeping her eye on me that night. There was nothing I could do. But tonight, I promise there won't be a problem.
Tom was excited about this evening. Now he had something to think about during his boring class. As soon as he walked into the classroom, the teacher yelled out his name.
Thomas Sawyer.
He knew he was in trouble whenever someone called him by his full name. He didn't look at the teacher, but walked directly to his desk and took a seat.
Thomas Sawyer, what's your excuse for being late this time?
Before he answered, Tom saw the new girl sitting with the other girls. He noticed that the chair next to hers was empty. Seeing this, he got an idea and shouted out so everyone could hear it clearly.
I met Huckleberry Finn on my way to school, and we had a nice long talk.
This was a good way to get into trouble, because, like all the other adults, Tom's teacher didn't like Huckleberry Finn. None of the students could understand why Tom had admitted this. Any excuse would be better than this one.
I've told you 100 times never to speak with that boy. I'll have to make sure you remember it next time. Come here and take off your coat.
Tom knew what was going to happen. The teacher collected sticks that he found useful for hitting his students with as punishment for their bad behavior. Most of his supply had been used to beat Tom. After he'd finished beating him, the teacher said,
Maybe that will help you to remember. Now, go and sit with the girls.
Happily, Tom went over and sat next to the new girl. She tried not to look at him and turned to talk to a girl behind her. When she turned back around to face the front of the room, she found an apple sitting on her desk. She pushed it away, but Tom moved it back toward her, and when she tried to push it away again, he didn't let her. Then, Tom took out a piece of paper and started to write something on it. He covered it with his hands so she couldn't see what he was doing. "What are you doing there?" asked the girl. Tom finished and showed her that he'd drawn a house. It was a terrible drawing, but the girl seemed to like it anyway. "Great! Now draw a man for me." Tom did what he was told, but he also drew a woman next to the man. "It's wonderful," said the girl. "I wish I could draw like that."
Okay, I'll teach you how to draw during lunch. Or are you going back home?
asked Tom. "I'll stay if you'll really teach me."
Okay, but what's your name?
Becky Thatcher. What's your... Oh, of course, I know your name. You're Tom Sawyer.
You can just call me Tom.
As he said this, he took out another piece of paper and started to write something, but again he didn't let Becky see. "Now what are you doing?"
Nothing, really.
"Oh, please let me see it."
If I show, do you promise not to tell the teacher?
"I promise." Becky quickly took the paper from Tom and read the words, "I love you." "Oh, you're such a bad boy," she said, hitting him gently on the head, but she was smiling a very big smile. Tom smiled back, but suddenly he felt someone take hold of his ear and pull him up from his chair.
You should go sit with the boys now, young man.
said the teacher as he moved Tom back toward his other seat. And even though the whole class laughed at Tom, he felt nothing but happiness in his heart. Chapter 7. Tom Gets Engaged. At lunchtime, after the teacher had left the classroom, Tom went to sit with Becky and taught her how to draw. They drew only for a little while, and then started talking instead.
Tell me, Becky, have you ever promised to marry a boy before?
No, of course not.
Would you like to promise to marry someone?
Maybe, but I don't know how.
It's easy. You just agree to marry the boy, kiss him, and that's it.
Kiss? What for?
It's just what people do. Do you remember what I wrote?
Yes.
What did I write? If you don't, I can say it again.
Becky just laughed and said, "Not now."
But I want to say it now. Okay, I'll say it quietly in your ear.
He put his mouth close to her ear and whispered the words. Then he sat back and said,
Do you want to say it to me?
She became embarrassed and asked him to look the other way. Then she put her hand to his ear and whispered the same words, "I love you," and ran away from him. He started to try to catch her as she ran between the tables and chairs in the classroom. Finally, he caught her, but she covered her face with her hands. Tom waited patiently for her to remove her hands, and when she eventually did, he kissed her and said,
Now you've promised to marry me. You can never love another boy.
Okay, and you can never marry another girl.
Of course. I'll love and marry only you, and we'll play together every day.
I think I like this kind of promise. What do you call it?
It's called getting engaged. I like it too. I and Amy Lawrence were...
But Tom stopped when he saw Becky's eyes get bigger. She was clearly not happy anymore. You mean you've been engaged to other girls before? Becky cried.
Oh, well, I never did marry Amy, and I don't love her anymore.
Seeing that she didn't seem to feel better, Tom took a gold-colored ball from his pocket and tried to give it to her. She took it and threw it on the ground. Tom felt both hurt and angry. He walked out of the school and into the forest, and he planned to stay there for the rest of the day. Becky thought that he would come back a few minutes later, but when he didn't, she started to call out for him. Tom, where did you go? Please come back. When no reply came, she started to cry even harder than before.